ahead and start recording. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I see some familiar faces, some also faces of former students. So I see you out there and appreciate you all being here today. And hopefully I can enlighten you a bit today on the physical education evaluations. And again, I'm Kevin Larson from Wright State University, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you, Randy, for the invite. And again, my goals for today are just to share the importance of the physical education evaluation, how we might go about implementing the evaluation in 2020-21, and also talk a little bit more about using the Excel data sheets if we need to, and then integrating the evaluation within some of your restart plans. So some of this may be familiar to you that have joined us previously. So we shared a little bit of this in the spring or in the summer at the Oford Summer Institute, but we hope you can get some new things and also take the opportunity to share a little bit at the end if you have time. So just a couple of things. Remember to mute yourself to minimize the background noise if you haven't already, and most of you have. Don't forget to unmute when you're ready to talk. There will probably be 3 segments of today's presentation that'll give you a chance to and give us a chance to stop a little bit to address any questions that might be in the chat box or any comments. Also, feel free to raise your hand within the chat box if you do have a question or a comment. Randy's gonna monitor that for me and let me know. But again, a couple of times during the day today, we will stop and kind of check in to see where everybody might be. All right, so as we adapt to our new normal, and it's interesting that what we thought was normal in June, July, and August may be different than what normal is now. Some of you are in person, some of you in person distancing, some of you are in person in a classroom, some of you are hybrid, some of you are online. It's all very different, and some of you are transitioning because we're getting to the end of that first quarter. And so I'm getting many more questions about, okay, so now we're gonna switch. Where do I go next? And what do I do? And so just some reminders in terms of the questions that pop up along the way. I think the #1 piece is to be able to adapt and adjust. We've had plan A, you're probably implementing plan B and thinking about plan C, and you're hoping that the plan that you have for today makes it through the end of the day. So just remember that, and we'll keep adapting and adjusting. And the #1 priority is how are we meeting our students' needs, and how we do that is just a little bit different depending on how we deliver it. How are we still learning in health and physical education? Obviously, you're going to get from me and many of you that know me, the priority is on making sure that we're learning. That's the priority in the standards, and using the evaluation is to make sure that our students are learning. It might be a little bit different how they learn. It might even be a little bit different in terms of what they learn this year, but they're always learning. And again, we're trying to also make connections between our work in physical education to what's going on in social emotional learning also. And I'm sure you're going to get that either in a presentation today or multiple presentations down the road. And if we've learned anything in 2020, 2021, we've been pushed both at the state level and at the national level. I got an email yesterday that basically said, the veil or the curtain has been drawn back, and folks can really see what we're doing in physical education. And so as that curtain gets drawn back, some of us are like, whoa, are we really, is this who we are, and is this what we do? And so we are public, whether it's with parents and the communities. And so we have to make sure that we're advocates for quality health and physical education. And we have to still be a part of that piece of advocating for healthy students and a high level of wellness for our students, our families, our colleagues, and even our community. And so that's really our role here. Before I dive into really the physical education evaluation, I'm hoping that most of you are aware of kind of our whole child focus. My slides are just a tad behind from when I click to when they show up for you. But again, just to remind you our role in this greater focus as I talk about advocacy, remember that the department ODE and the whole state is actually aligning itself to a whole child focus. As you can see on that strategic plan to the left, in the middle, that blue and gold diagram in the middle with the green center, I really wanted to share that our focus is on creating students that are healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. And that really is our focus, no matter what your format is this year. We are all trying to achieve those 5 tenets through a number of different things. And it just so happens on the far right, that's us, through comprehensive school physical activity programs. And within that, our focus is really on quality physical education, along with providing some of these other opportunities. Granted, it's really challenging right now to provide some of these opportunities when we have to remain distant and can't bring big groups together, but we're still finding ways to get folks to be physically active, whether that's our students in quality physical education, whether that's classroom physical activity breaks, whether it's trying to get our families to move along with their kids, or again, our communities to also be physically active. So I just wanted to share that our goal still is those five tenets of healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged, and we really support that work in physical education. If you haven't, make sure you're aware of some of the resources that are out there for you. Again, this is me being a bit of an advocate for OFERD, but make sure you dive into some of the Restart resources, and these are hyperlinked, and we'll make sure that you get the slide deck when we're all finished. But OFERD has provided Restart resources. Some of them I'm going to provide today. Presentations from Summer Institute, and also you can find our health, education, and physical education requirements. ODE does a great job. Actually, most of our links for physical education requirements are linked right to the department and the work that Randy does. So if you ever need those, we've got the links there for you. If you haven't been on Shape America's website, make sure you go there. It's a great clearinghouse of COVID resources. I think OFERD is more helpful in planning local curriculum and thinking about the physical education evaluation. I think Shape America, we've deferred to them for resources such as how do you physically distant and some of those guidelines, while also meeting the needs of your students. And again, just a couple other resources that you could go to in terms of Open Phys Ed and Chromebook PE might be some other resources you can go to. So moving on to the main purpose of today. So what I want to do today is to just share how we might plan for 2021 within the context of the physical education evaluation. And so this slide is really just a set of 4 steps to think about as we would design our curriculum. And again, I understand most of you are already in, like we're at the end of quarter 1. But what we might do is you might use any of these tools as you continue to move throughout the year. For me, the planning piece, and again, most of the work is done by you locally, but the planning piece, I think, starts with looking at the physical education evaluation, thinking about how you're going to meet those needs first, and then build your curriculum from there. So we would determine what evaluations we can do based on each instructional format, and then begin to plan our scope and sequence. And that scope and sequence is different this year. Typically, we'd plan a scope and sequence to meet our 180 days or so throughout the school year, and what we would do quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4. This year, you're kind of planning, and you're planning for what instructional format. So if we're online, we're doing this. If we're hybrid, we're doing this. And if we're in person, we're doing this. And if we're in person, distant or kind of no restrictions, what are we doing? And so it's kind of different. Instead of planning for your calendar, you're planning for high, moderate, or kind of low risk implementation. So the first step in this process, and again, this tool is available to you on the OFERD website, as I wait for just a second for my slide to catch up with everything else. There you go. So the physical education evaluation tool, this is available on that OFERD website underneath all the resources for COVID planning. What I wanted you to do with this tool is just to think about your existing evaluations that you're supposed to complete. What I want you to do is to think about how you're going to complete each of those. And the risk level, by the way, just means high means that we're face-to-face, and you can change the terminology if you want to. When we did this in the summer, we were thinking about risk level rather than how we were delivering instruction. But high risk is typically no restrictions. Moderate could be that we're supposed to remain physically distant, and then low risk would be that we're online. And so this example here for grades 3 through 5 for dribbling, if we're in an online learning format, students would submit videos, flip grids, whatever it may be. If we're in a moderate environment, we would find a way to create dribbling opportunities where we would still remain 6 feet apart. If we were in a high risk or face-to-face with limited restrictions, we would do typically what we've always done in the past for the evaluation. And so what I'd like you to do with each one of your assessments is not necessarily, can I do that or can't I do that? It's what does it look like if I'm in school, no restrictions? What if I have some restrictions and I have to remain distant? And what happens if we're online? And so by prioritizing it, you're kind of ready to go for whatever might be thrown your way. And also an additional step from that might be what standards work best online. You might go back and say, okay, this one's really one that I can do online. This is one that I could do in any of the 3 opportunities. I could do it online, I could do it face-to-face, and I can do it with restrictions. Other assessments, you're going to be like, look, we have to be face-to-face to do this. In particular, standard 2A with tactics and strategies, really difficult to see if someone can move to open space or make decisions when you're online. You just really can't do that. There might be some activities, in particular within standard 1B, especially for grades 3 through 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. You can't really do those if you're supposed to remain distant. It's really difficult to play basketball, for example, or soccer if we're supposed to stay 6 feet apart. So we're hoping that this physical education evaluation tool is kind of the first step to say, okay, how do we do this? Not necessarily if we do it or not, but how can we? I also think in discussions with everyone else, there might be some standards that we might not be able to get done just because of how get done in terms of there might be evaluations that we might not be able to complete just because of what risk level we might be operating in. If you are online for the entire year, you might not be able to complete 2A. You might find out if they know about tactics and strategies, but you won't really get to assess whether or not they can demonstrate it in a game. And that's kind of the way things go with this year. So we're going to do our best and do our best with whatever format we might have. Okay, Randy, I'm going to pause right there for just a second to see if you have any comments, questions, or if you wanted to add anything in so far in terms of prioritizing what assessments you complete in whatever instructional format you might be in.
No, I think you're doing a good job.
Okay.
I would just say, I know that a lot of PE teachers right now at the beginning with little access to equipment and sanitizing and all that, I know a lot of them are starting with their standards that deal with fitness. So that would be the only thing I would really add in.
Yeah, we're finding a lot of folks that I've talked to, and it's whether it's my student teachers or some of the cooperating teachers and just the friends that I've always worked with, we are prioritizing certain things that you can get done fairly easy online with limited equipment. And so early on, it seems like we're getting a lot of standard 1A done, which is your locomotor skills, your dance, jump rope routines, that we can have equipment that we are not sharing and that we can usually perform within a small space. I think the other ones that we can complete online, things like standard 5A and 5B, become prioritized. I would agree that standard 3A and 3B kind of get done also because you can complete them fairly easy online or face-to-face. And so what I'd like you to do is to prioritize the things that you can do now and the things that you might do later if things kind of get back to quote normal. Unfortunately, I think normal is what it is right now, and that may be normal. So again, I think that's where we're headed. I see folks struggling a bit to do 1B, especially team sports. I see some struggles with 2A, but I've heard lots of good things from folks that have been able to do 3A and B, 5A and B, 2B have been things that we've been able to get done early here in the semester or in the school year. Okay. We'll go ahead and continue unless there's another question, but it looks like we might be okay. All right.
Yeah, right now you're good.
Okay. So let's talk data sheets. So again, this is kind of what happens if we can't collect all the data. So again, the priority here is to collect as much data as possible because the data is really useful. We'll talk about that in just a second. I think you follow the same guidelines if a student was injured or moved. We've always done that in the past, which is to collect as much data as you can possibly. And if you can't, we'll talk real quick about strategies of how to deal with the data sheets and what that means when things are missing, okay? So there's basically, first of all, I would always download the data sheets from ODE. I think the Excel files are great. I think they do what they're supposed to do. They're pretty effective. We spent a lot of time back in 2016 putting these things together and testing them out. So I hope that most of you are using the data sheets because we put a lot of work in on them at the time. But let's talk real quick about what those data sheets might look like. So first of all, how do you unlock the data sheets? So they come to you as locked data sheets, and I'm going to switch real quick from PowerPoint to Excel. So I apologize if this all comes falling apart, but I'm going to quit presenting for just a minute and try to present the Excel. Okay, so you should be able to see my Excel sheet in just a second. Now, there are kind of a couple of situations here. One I'll talk about is what happens if you need to unlock individual data sheets. You can go to the Review tab, and hopefully you can still see, but for me on a Mac, the Review tab is right here. And in the Review tab, I can unprotect the sheet or unlock it. And that's all you have to do is unlock it. And then you can mess around with all the cells. Okay, so just go ahead and unlock. I typically do not unlock individual data sheets unless I need to change something within a column here. But again, when you're filling out these data sheets, you can type in your 2s or 3s, and it does all the math for you. Got it. If for some reason you can't complete one of these, again, just leave it blank and your average will get updated. I think where things get a little complicated for folks is when we get back here down to standards total, student totals, and data for ODE. So I'm going to work in student totals just for a second. Again, my worksheet's already unprotected. But again, if you needed to unprotect it, just go to Review and hit it. Mine says Protect Sheets right now because it's already unlocked. But go ahead and unlock that. Now, within this, you're going to see that you see the divided by zeros. That's just the fact that they've taken the totals from the other Excel worksheets that are already in here. Okay. But if there was data already entered, you would see it in here as like 2s and 3s. But now that your worksheet's unlocked, what I would tell you is if you don't have that data, or if you're unable to collect, let's say standard 1B, let's say that entire benchmark you couldn't collect the data for, you could blank it out. Okay. And eventually what that would do is give you an average at the end of the day. So let me show you real quick what the average might look like. Again, I wouldn't do this. Your Excel sheets will automatically total this page, but let me show you what happens when we do have them all filled out. So let's say we do have them all filled out and it gives me a total of, I don't know why it hasn't switched back. I love you, Google presentation. I'm not on that page anymore. It's locked on standards total and it won't show you student totals. Hang on just a second. Apologies for that. I'm showing you something that's not beneficial at the moment.
You're fine.
All right, we'll see if this works now. So if you can see where I'm at, you see Kevin with all these scores all the way across, and you can see that my overall score is proficient. All I'm telling you is that if you have a benchmark that you're unable to assess, once you unlock the sheets, you can just blank it out and it will update the score for you. Okay. And you can still get your proficient, and I don't know if this is going to work right now. It'll still show you your standard totals. It's not going to show it. I have to stop presenting every time. So it'll still show up in your standards total, and it'll still show up in your data for ODE. So again, you can see the standards total here, that we have our total advanced proficient in there, and it'll also show the data for ODE, the number of kids that are advanced, proficient, and limited. And again, I apologize that Google is not keeping up with me as I switch through these different worksheets. So if for some reason, if your data sheets, if you do not get rid of that divisible by 0, that hashtag division by 0, your totals will not automatically show up here in the data for ODE totals. So please make sure that if you do not collect a benchmark, that you make sure that you blank it out. And if you put in a 0, it'll decrease your averages. It'll give you an incorrect score. So real quick, let me just show you that. So if for some reason I put in a 0, it artificially lowers my score. I went from a 2.5 down to a 2.3. So we don't want to put zeros in. We just want to leave it blank if we were unable to collect that data. Okay. So that's kind of how we handle the data sheets just a little bit. Randy, I'll pause for just a second. Number one, I have to switch back to it wanting to present PowerPoint, and I'll see if there are any questions because that was choppy to explain that a bit.
None in the chat box, but does anybody want to come off of mute and ask any questions so far?
Just to reinforce also, there are two columns that you will not want to mess with. Do not edit the benchmark average or overall performance column. You will do all your changes within the actual benchmark totals within it. Do not change the far right columns. That will mess up the entire Excel sheet. So don't change those, but you might change the numbers within those individual cells within each benchmark. Okay. So again, slides 10, 11, and 12 can help you just a little bit for organizing your data sheet in case you have missing benchmark data, in case you have an entire benchmark that might be missing. It gives you the details to do that. Okay, if for some instance, hopefully this slide changes here real quick, if you have students who do not complete any assessments for any benchmarks, remember, if you have no ODE evaluation data for a student across all 5 benchmarks, you're going to enter a 0 for all those benchmarks, and the student will be scored non-participatory. Remember, that's not a failing grade or anything like that, but what that does for the department is it keeps track of the students who were in physical education but did not get counted through the evaluation. So that's an important number for us. Sometimes that happens where kids don't get a score throughout the year. For example, last year, my child was injured the entire year. She was actually scored as, she should have been scored as non-participatory, but it was because she was injured. She had a broken arm the entire year. So that made her non-participatory. And I will be honest with you, in light of that, I thought that the teacher should have scored her in at least a couple of them. In the written assessment, she should have had something for 5A, 5B, and she should have had something for standard 3. So I disagreed that she was non-participatory. But some folks would have said, hey, she wasn't able to be in class because of her arm, so we counted her as non-participatory. So again, there might be instances where this happens, but more than likely, we're going to get data on some people, or on most people, in almost all of the benchmarks. There will be instances where you can't. Okay. So again, how does this then translate into planning a curriculum? I wanted to share early on that we want to prioritize the evaluations, and then we have to rethink about our curriculum and how we can still meet these evaluations within a high quality physical education curriculum that's being delivered in a number of different ways, whether that is in person, in school, with physical distancing. I got an email just a little bit ago about how do I teach physical education in a classroom where we have to be 6 feet apart. It is a different context, but you can still do many things, but you're probably not going to be able to do a whole lot of 1B because of the equipment and the space might be needed to play some sports and games. So again, this chart is designed to just help you plan how you might implement the evaluation within a number of different approaches. And there are actually 2 slides to that. That we have on the Oford website, whether that be the front page, which talks about the standards and what standards you're going to meet within that unit or topic. And then the second page of that goes on to talk about how you're going to meet some of these other considerations about providing a physically and emotionally safe environment, creating a sense of belonging, and promoting positive behaviors. So again, we use this chart early on. Some of you might be back revisiting just because.
There is a question in the chat. It said, I thought Kevin said we should not put zeros in, that we should leave the section blank. Could you please clarify?
Good. So good question. So the only time you would be a 0, and this is something that we did early on, the only time that a kid would ever get a 0 is if they are non-participatory. So if they say, I'm not doing this, they would get a 0. So thank you for asking for that clarification. I used the example was probably a poor example, that we had a disagreement between a teacher and I. They wanted to score my child a 0 because they weren't technically in class because they didn't have the ability to be in there because they were injured. They didn't want her anywhere near where she could get hit or anything like that. So they said she should be a 0 and non-participatory. In hindsight, what I would say is that she should be blank for anything that involved actual activity because she couldn't move. So she could have done standards 5AB. She could have done standard 3AB. She could have done standard 2B and gotten scores for that and then blank on all the others. So yes, thank you for that question, clarification. Basically, it's when a kid is just not going to do any of the assessments. That's when you go to non-participatory. And you include those non-participatory or a kid that refuses to complete the evaluation, you would use it as the count of students not evaluated in the grade band. So apologies for a poor example, but hopefully that helps you. More than likely, your data sheet is blank if you can't collect data rather than a 0. Okay, so here's another planning tool that may be helpful for you folks also. So when we take this initial looking at your evaluation and how do I implement it in-person, hybrid versus online, you might look at it this way also. Think about what unit topic you're going to create or teach, and then what evaluation you're going to do. So if we were in-person learning, and I'm just going to pick like, let's just say it's just jump rope for grades 3 through 5. I might use standard 1A for that and 4A for that. And so what we're trying to get you to do in planning is to be able over on this checklist to say, I can check all of these boxes. And so eventually I see that I am going to be able to complete each of the benchmarks. Now for hybrid, could I still do jump rope? Probably. And I could still do jump rope if I was online. Now what happens that's a little bit different, let's say if I wanted to, I could do, if we were in-person learning, I tried to do soccer. Now could I do soccer if we were hybrid? I might not. And so I might have to come up with another way to assess 1B. And it might be a little tricky, but it might be a target game that we could do. Again, it's not the best. It doesn't click all the boxes for standard 1B, but it could help us get there along the way. So again, I want you to think about planning for 2020, 2021 around the different approaches to learning while still trying to make sure that we can check the fact that we've done all of our evaluations. And again, if you happen to be in-person learning and you get to that point, I would try to knock out as many of those in-person learnings have-tos right away here. Whereas some of these you could do in any format, like jump rope could be something that could be done online and remotely. I might push that back, or if I am online, that's where I'm going to head first. So again, it's a little bit more difficult for you, but again, you're able to address all of the benchmarks along the way. All right, so just a couple notes about the data, and I think folks have asked this over a number of years, whether when we first started this out, I think we're at like year 8 or 9 for the actual evaluations that we've done them, and the updated version has been since 2016. But many people ask us, hey, why are we doing the physical education evaluations? Why are they important? And as advocacy chair, I was around for all of this from day one when the original standards were created until now. The reasons that I share are probably a little bit different than what you would share. And let's just talk a little bit about why this data is important and why we would spend the time to do it. I want to talk first about how the data actually helps a variety of groups and what the tools might be used for. Because I don't know if people always use the Excel data sheets in a way that's beneficial to you and your students. So if you look at that Excel sheet again, there's 3 sheets at the end. There are student total, benchmark total, and overall total. Student totals help the student understand what benchmarks they're scoring the highest in. Pretty self-explanatory then, but you can also go back in within each of those individual worksheets and see how your kids are doing. Are there certain skills that we're good at, certain skills that we need additional work for? And so we think student totals is great feedback for individual students about skills that they might excel in, things that they need additional work in. That's great. That helps the student, but it also helps us. If we're reflective, we can go back and look at the data and say, maybe we need to work a little bit more on dance, or maybe we need to spend a little bit more time on fitness concepts, or maybe there's a part of that rubric that we haven't taught very well in standard 5A or 5B. So I think the student totals can help us with that. The benchmark totals are really useful at the end of the year or when you're planning for next year, and you can go back and take a wide scope look and say, okay, what benchmarks do we do well and what benchmarks do we need to work a little bit more on? And I think that's a conversation almost at the district level. When you have a chance to bring in your colleagues within your district and say, all right, so what do we do and what do we do well? I think the benchmarks totals page is great for that K through 12 curriculum planning piece. I think the student totals help you year to year, lesson to lesson, or even unit to unit that you're teaching. I think student totals help you with that. I think benchmark totals, to have that annual reflection to go back and say, okay, so how'd we do? And what things could we do better across our K-12 curriculum and across different teachers within a district. So you could talk across the grade bands, K through 12, but you could also talk across schools how we're doing. So I think benchmark totals help us there. Overall totals, that really helps the department. Again, that's data that you're reporting to ODE. And I think many of you folks, I've heard it many times, folks are like, I've done all this work and all it is 3 numbers. And then that 3 numbers ends into 1 rating, which is high, moderate, or low. And they're like, that doesn't seem like, that's not fair. We've done all this work for just that. And I want you to understand that the just that piece is really important. The just that, first of all, we've known since we've started these evaluations that about 70% of our districts are meeting the benchmarks. And that's a really significant thing to say that for the most part, we know that our students in grades K through 12 are meeting our standards and benchmarks. You may not think that's important on a day-to-day basis, but when you're advocating at the State House or you're advocating with your administrators to say, we really should keep physical education around, it becomes a really valuable tool. That today's physical education is not what you experienced 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's different, and here's how. And so it helps us have a conversation at the policy making level and at the administrative level. That's really important to us. And so you're collecting that data and you're like, why do we do this? It becomes very important to us as a profession moving forward. And we're one of the few states that actually can measure and say, look, our students are actually learning in the state of Ohio. Other places, yeah, they collect fitness data and they're like, yeah, our kids have this level of fitness. But no one does what we do in terms of saying, our kids learn this. And I can even go back and say, our kids learn this about standard 1 and this about standard 2. And this is actually how well we're doing in those areas. So lots of folks are impressed by what we do. And so I think sometimes folks get frustrated that they get this overall total and a rating. The rating means something. Not that we're comparing ourselves to someone else, but it gives value to the profession to say, we've achieved these outcomes. And everyone knows that these outcomes are important because they lead to a physically active lifestyle in our students, but also it's going to help us have a healthier Ohio at the end of the day. So I just wanted you all to know that those overall totals become very important, and the student totals are important, and the benchmark totals are important. So that data helps us make decisions and actually helps student learning and helps the profession in general. I can give you a specific example. So when we went back to school, there was a district that said, hey, we can't do physical education online. And the response was, what do you mean you can't? I can show you what they could do online. Here are the things that you're missing out by saying we can't do that. And that was then helpful to change their perception about, okay, so we can do this, and this is what we are going to do as we go back online, with the hope that we would be back face to face. So again, understand that the evaluation helps you because it's kind of a requirement that we have to do. But also in that requirement, we become better because our students learn a little bit more, and it helps us communicate to others about what physical education is all about. Many people thought we were just there to do some physical activity, to get kids to move around for a little bit. There are important things that we're going to learn, and we're able to show that through the evaluations. So overall, just some advocacy, and then I'll let Randy chime in here a bit. In terms of advocacy, I'm hoping as we move forward that it's reinforced to everyone that when we come back to school or when we've been in school this year, health is really important. And I'm hoping that we can continue to reinforce the role that physical education plays in your students' health, whether it's mental health, physical health, emotional well-being. all of that is in play. And we said, many folks have said from the governor on down, that kids need to be in school so that they're healthy. And one of the places that they're going to learn how to be healthy is with us in physical education. So continue on that path and know that we have to reinforce that message that we are key and that we're key to educating the whole child. Again, I want to reinforce that we're here to help kids be healthy, but we're also helping them to feel safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. You're probably one of the most important pieces of their day and of their week. So please make sure we keep pushing forward and really emphasizing those tenets along the way. Look for opportunities to get folks engaged in physical activity. Remember, we're more likely to be physically active when we get families engaged, parents engaged, and kids engaged and their peers engaged, where we're trying to create this culture that movement is something that we do all the time. So continue to work on that piece. And again, I talked about pulling the curtain back, but it's also pulling the curtain back to an opportunity that we can share with folks that physical education isn't how you had it in school. It's actually this place where we're learning, and help them to engage with their kids, with their own children a little bit more, to be physically active. Also, as an advocate, I need to make sure that you know the requirements and utilize them. Our evaluation becomes an important tool to make sure that physical education is part of the school day. Also, make sure you know the requirements that are outlined in Ohio Revised Code. Randy has outlined them in nice detail on the website, but make sure you know them and utilize them along the way. And be an advocate. Every day that you go to work and your kids are learning in physical education, you are an advocate. But one of the things that we need to be better about, and I think folks are starting to learn, that we need to communicate, share, and engage our stakeholders so that they know what we're doing. That story that I told you, that physical education can happen online or it can't happen physically distant. Many people are saying that, but then we have the evidence to prove it, and we just haven't shared it out with folks. And so we're going to continue to work to do that moving forward, that we can. And that can-do attitude I appreciate from all of you, and I hope it continues along the way as we continue to educate others about what we can do. Randy, I'm going to pause there for just a second to see if you have any questions, comments, or needs to hop in.
Absolutely. Thank you for all of that, though. There is a question in the box asking about what do teachers do with their data sheets? I answered it saying that, just in case anybody else had this question, teachers turn their data sheets into your district's EMIS person, who then sends it to ODE's EMIS and data office. This person tends to be, not always, but tends to be a secretary at the district, but not always. It might be their only role, or counselors also sometimes take on this role as well. So that is what you do with your data sheets. Another thing I wanted to say was that everything Kevin talked about is absolutely right for the sheets that are on ODE. There is another option if this maybe you just don't want to deal with all of this, okay? You can also make your own data sheet, and you can do it with Excel, or you can do it with Word, however you want to do it. And say you don't get all of your evaluations or assessments completed because of COVID. You can manipulate your data sheet to look however you want. It's just going to take a little bit of math and a little bit of extra work to figure out what your average score is going to look like for the standards and evaluations that you did complete for your students. And then what we mainly need to know at ODE is how many kids you had that were limited, how many were proficient, and how many were advanced. And I get asked a lot, why do we have to do these evaluations? Kevin covered a lot of that on ways that you can utilize them. But the reason that ODE needs these, there's a few reasons. One, reporting is just mandated by law to report. But what we do with the actual information is whenever standard revisions come up, I then meet with the EMIS office and I look at all of these scores from all over Ohio. And say I have limited and standard 2, benchmark A, and it's just across the board. There's so many limited in that. I'm going to take another look at that standard and revise it and say, why are we scoring so low in that? Or at the other end of the spectrum, why is everybody getting advanced in this? Like every single kid is getting advanced. Do we need to tweak that standard, revise it, and make it a little bit more difficult? So that's why we need the standards. Me personally, in my role, that's what I look for when I'm revising the standards. I feel like there's another.
Randy, just to add on that, just to piggyback on a couple of those. So the assessment data also. So while you're putting those three numbers in, districts get rated high, moderate, or low, every now and then, I haven't done it in a couple of years because we've been too busy and I haven't had a chance to do it by hand. But we've gone back and we've actually pulled that data for each district so that we can do a statewide report. We've written a couple articles about it to say how many districts are high, moderate, low, and non-report. And we knew early on when we started this, districts were doing non-reports when they really should. Like there was a middle school with like 1,000 kids that were like non-report. I'm like, wait a second, you can't be a non-report district. You're supposed to have data. You're a middle school. You're supposed to have benchmark data. And so we went back and said, why don't you have data? And then the questions started to ask from there where we're not offering physical education to all of our kids. Why not? You're supposed to. And so it started this process to eventually do some change within the district to make sure that they're offering what they're supposed to be doing. But again, that data, those three scores become really important for us to talk about how we're doing as a state and how we're doing locally. One other thing to share in terms of your data, while the state needs those three numbers, I think the Excel sheet and any data that you would collect, I would not only share it with EMIS, but I would share it with your curriculum director. I think becoming really good friends and being an advocate to your curriculum director is key. They're the ones that are going to help you if you need to revise your curriculum, if you need resources. So I would always share the data in two different places. EMIS takes care of your requirements. I think curriculum then says, okay, so how are we doing? Kind of what Randy just said. How are we doing? But I think curriculum usually answers those questions for you. So share that data with your curriculum director. They get excited about data all the time. They do it for all the other subject areas. So share it with them. And if I have any other curriculum directors on here, hello, we like you and you help support us. So good to have you on here. Sorry, go ahead, Randy.
No, you're good. When I was teaching phys ed, another thing I did with my middle school and high school kids was I explained this process to them. I don't think many teachers do that, but I think my students appreciated that because I went through every standard and every benchmark with them. And then I went through the ODE data sheets with them and said, you know, this is why we are doing what we're doing in here. You need to learn these standards. I have to give you a grade on these. I have to give you a number on these. And then I have to turn into the state. And I would go through those. And I think one of the important things to show them was on the evaluation data sheet, you have to score them on, you know, the respectful, on the kids being respectful, and are they being safe, and are they cooperative? And that would always blow their mind. So that would always help with some behavior issues too. It was like, hey, I have to turn this into the state on how you are cooperating with other kids. And so that was always just a little bit of, you know, a little bit of advice if you want to share that with your students. It did help with behavior issues as well.
Well, and it holds everyone accountable, and there are different ways that you can hold people accountable. So I saw Susie's question, by the way. So there are low spots in the state. There are folks that have scored low on the evaluation. Yes,
Yeah.
It's a smaller number. It's like 10% typically most years. So how that usually works, and the state doesn't follow up. So this isn't Randy doing this. This is me saying, okay, low performing. And most people would be really upset at low performing. It's not a bad thing. It's a conversation to have. And so why were our scores low? Well, they might be low because you only have 6 weeks of physical education at the middle school. And how can anyone develop skills and knowledge in 6 weeks, you know, in like 30 hours of instruction? You can't achieve those benchmarks. So that was the conversation back. It wasn't just more time, but and then the conversation was, well, how are we a little bit more efficient? How can I get you a little bit more time? Maybe if we go up to 9 weeks, what could we do better for? So I think it leads to that conversation. It's not a competition for everybody to be in the high level. And actually, we don't expect schools to score high. I will tell you right now, if I see a high performing school, I'm like, so what are you doing? Because it's really difficult to get to that level. You need like almost 85% of your school to be an advanced performer on all those benchmarks. That usually doesn't happen. Most of us are moderate, and a small percentage on either side will either be high or low. And really, it doesn't mean much other than part of the reflective process. It's not really a competition. It's just to say, what could we do and what could we do better? And I would expect your high-performing districts to ask the same question. What could we do better? Might be at the individual student level rather than the larger level, but what could we do better? So go ahead, Randy, if there's other ones out there that are questions I missed.
There was one that asked about the IRN number to submit this data. Yes, you do need an IRN number. It's not a hard number to acquire. The secretary should give it right to you. But sometimes you don't have to add it. If you turn it in, sometimes your EMIS coordinator will add it for you. Sometimes EMIS coordinators also send you the data sheets with the names of your students already on it. I was never fortunate to have anybody do that for me, so I had to write everybody's names out. But so yes, definitely thank them if they do that for you. The other thing I was going to say is that I do get asked a lot, especially during COVID, why do we need to do evaluations? Why are they making us do them? This is ridiculous. It is actually something good. We want this. Senate Bill 210 is actually where PE evaluations are in legislation. And this was a huge win for the physical education community. And I know Kevin wants to jump on this, so I'm going to let you go ahead.
Well, from a sheer advocacy standpoint, it's one of the cards that we can play so that we can stay around. You know, to legitimately blame the assessments and the evaluation, it's been blamed for a lot of things. People can get angry at it for a number of reasons, and you can blame it for the reason that physical education still exists. Some of you will not be able to teach physical education this year if that evaluation didn't exist. And it's really about the conversation between what is physical activity and what is physical education. And physical activity is pretty easy to get. I can tell kids to go out and play and do those types of things. And we would have been in the physical activity model. And I don't know how many of you wanted to teach in that model, but we would have been there. And it would have been really hard to justify our program still existing. But in physical education, we know what our kids are supposed to learn. And I think it really helped us actually online that we were able to say, we can do this, we kind of can do this, but we're not going to be able to do this online. And so I think the evaluations and that still requirement today has been essential for us to stick around, in particular in a physical education model where we want our kids to learn how to be physically active. We just don't want them to get outside and run around. We want them to learn how to do it. So I think that's been key for us. And it's really one of the few cards that we have to play moving forward to justify our existence in districts. So I will fight from now until the end of time to keep the evaluation around. It's really important to us.
I agree. So don't look at it as a negative, look at it as a positive.
It has been, and I think many people have been able to move forward in planning. When I talk to the health education folks, they become almost paralyzed by this, so what do I do? And for us, you know, what do we do is defined by what our kids are learning. And so we were able to move forward, but then we had really rich questions about what we could and couldn't do. And I've been frankly amazed by the ability of folks to just go ahead and do it. Like they're, okay, we're going to do the evaluation, so I'm going to figure out how to do it. The can-do attitude has been fantastic for folks. And I think the evaluation helps us have that can-do attitude. You know, so as we move forward, and I kind of flip to that last slide, is do your best. And I think we're doing the best that we can. And I think the evaluations, it's a nice setup that we're accountable, but it's not high stakes. So we're doing our best with what we can do. And I think it's been great.
Susie said, my kindergarten classes are really low this year. Has anyone seen this in their district, or is this just a problem in my city? I've ran into that as well. I mean, there's a variety of reasons. Sometimes kindergarten, I mean, that's their first time going to a school setting if they didn't go to preschool. So maybe it's their first time where they're away from video games, and maybe they don't get to play outside a lot, or nobody has taught them, you know, skipping and jumping and all that stuff. So it's just brand new to some kids. So you're starting at ground zero with them, when some kids might have a little upper hand where maybe they have older siblings that have taught them, or they're in gymnastics or other activities where they've worked on this stuff. So I wouldn't get upset about that. You're just going to have to take a little extra time to work with them, because it's probably just their first time in a school setting where they're being around galloping, hopping, skipping, all that stuff. So
yeah, I think some of our early childhood pieces, I mean, if you think about in the spring, we missed out on that key piece of instruction. And so I think a lot of our data, it'll be tough to determine if this kindergarten or the first grade classes are a little bit behind schedule, or if it was COVID. I think it's going to be tough to determine that. But the interesting thing is your data might show that, that we were behind. The reasons behind that, we might have to figure it out later down the road. But yeah, I've heard that also, that we seem to be a step behind of where we should be, and that's okay. We'll work to get there, but that's an observation that people have noticed, Susie. So thank you for the question, comment.
We have about 7 minutes left according to my clock, maybe 8. If anybody has any questions left, or Kevin, do you have one more slide to go through?
I do. I just wanted to remind everybody that just do your best. I think we have our plan A, plan B, and whatever today is. So keep going and keep doing your best is how I'm doing my best to encourage you. And again, just be student learning and student-centered focused, and that connection to the whole child in terms of those tenets. You do play a key role in healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. But I think on the right is a really important piece also. My goodness, the work that you folks have done, the energy that you've exerted to do whatever your plan has been, please give yourself a chance to, number one, congratulate yourself or to congratulate others for the work that we've done. On the outside looking in, again, I'm not grinding day to day, I'm teaching my own classes, but to think about what we've pulled off, I hope that we are giving ourselves a little bit of a high five and giving ourselves some space. And that's been really hard right now. So give yourself a chance to think, to play a little bit also. I think part of the fun in this is we've reinvented ourselves. That's all the work that we've done, but we've also, done some new things. We've done some great new things. So give yourself a chance to play a bit, make some mistakes, and also take care of yourself. I think as we get into second quarter and beyond, we've really sprinted, and now we realize that it wasn't a 100-yard dash, that we've got to run a 400. And we need to learn how to pace ourselves or train ourselves up to get through this entire year. So make sure you're taking care of yourself. Again, we're supposed to be one of the main people leading the charge to be healthy and well, and that may include staff wellness and self-care. So make sure you're taking care of yourself as much as you are taking care of others along the way. But I'm proud of all of you and the work that you've done to take care of our kids.
So Susie, who had said our kindergarten classes are really low, she said that they can't gallop, hop, or skip, and her video is back from the parents. The parents don't even know how. I mean, I guess like a personal story with me. Yeah, I guess a personal story with me is I was at a district one time and I was doing my jump rope lesson, and so I got out all the jump ropes, and I assumed, which is not smart of me, but I assumed that all of the kids had jump roped before. That was really naive of me. So I learned that day that I should never assume that again. So I had an entire school that had never jump roped before. I think there was 2 kids maybe. So I had to take a step back and reevaluate, how am I going to do my jump rope lesson? So instead of starting where I normally would, I started for 2 weeks straight, not even having the jump ropes out. And they would all pick a line in the gymnasium and they would jump over that. And then we would start doing the hand motions. So you're just going to have to backtrack and start where you're not normally starting. You're going to have to say, okay, somebody that's never galloped before, how am I going to teach them how to gallop? You're going to have to go backwards a little bit more. So it's happened to the best of us. There's just some kids that just aren't around that stuff, like I said before. So you're just going to have to backtrack a little bit and just find other ways to teach them those skills.
And the parent side of me, Randy, sorry to interrupt, the parent side of me who has a 3rd grader right now, like I said, we're pulling the curtain back. And yeah, some of our parents never really learned the alphabet of our discipline. And there are movements and skills that they may not know. I now share that as a 3rd grader and we're recording this. Like there are some 3rd grade things I'm like, wait a second, what am I supposed to be doing here? So when we pull the curtain back, our parents also get to learn a little bit about what these skills might be and some of the things that we're doing in physical education. So we're a little bit understanding, but at the same time, it kind of shines a light on what we did in the past. Like there was a generation that didn't learn the things that their kids are now learning because of us. So it's just interesting. It makes me laugh a little bit. So thank you, Randy.
Yeah. And then they're just talking in the chat, trying to help out her because she sees them once every 3 weeks, but doing virtual lessons every week too. If you go on the ODE website and you go to the PE resource page, there is Tracy Grissom and Kent Hamilton did PE in a pandemic, and they do a lot of online lessons. And then there's another one by Callan Fowler, and she does online lessons. And I think it's titled Online Lessons. but she works with elementary kids, and she does a lot of GIFs. She makes GIFs of herself doing movements, and she says that that really helps. So those are things that you can do as well. So definitely teaching online. You can definitely do it online. It might take just a little bit more planning, but those are two really good example videos that you could watch. But yeah, I do, but the parents say how good they are, but they are wrong. Well, yeah, well, I mean, you're going to deal with that in everything sports do.
And Randy, I linked in, I think I've shared it with this group before. Yes. A colleague of mine, a teacher in the area, Doug Stebbins, I did a shout out to him again. He did a great job with his online lessons, thinking about how do we learn about it, practice it, and show it. And he's done a really great job in his lessons, incorporating, you know, what would be a quote normal lesson where we would learn about a skill. We would practice it. He gives them lots of different tasks and videos to learn how to do it. And then he also has an assessment in there, and it's easy to build in some of our PE evaluations or assessments along the way. So I linked that in there. Doug's happy if you contact him or if you kind of copy his lesson format. But I think, again, having the grounding of these standards and the evaluation piece has helped him think about, okay, what do we need to learn about? How do we practice it is kind of the stuff we've always done. It's just modifying it for at home or online. And then showing it piece is kind of that assessment piece where we're using our videos, Flipgrid, whatever it may be, or some of our Google Forms to show what we know and can do. So we can get there, and there's some great resources out there. I wanted to share quick that Oford is looking for more examples of awesome things that we're doing. We're trying our best to make sure that everybody knows what PE can do, while also showing some ideas that might be very creative and helpful to others. So if you do have some ideas or want to be featured as like our PE teacher of the week, let me know, and we'd be happy to take those and share them out through our social media channels at Oford. Yes,
it is definitely a great way to advocate for our field. So please take him up on that. I do want to be cautious of everybody's time. It is 4:29. I want to remind you that the link for your contact hours is in the chat box. Sorry. So click on that to get your contact hour for today. And then I will be sending this through communications and getting the link put up and put on the PE page as well. Give it about a week to get up there. Since we're all virtual, there's a lot going through them right now. So it does take about a week right now. So it will be up there if you want to rewatch it. And I already emailed the slide deck to Tom. So Tom will then be sending that out. So look for that. And then next week is our middle school and high school PE teacher only. So if you are coming to that, please bring lesson plans or ideas or questions or something so we can have a really good conversation. And then the following week will be the elementary one. And I just want to thank Kevin for coming on, taking the time to do this for me. I appreciate it. And I also want to thank Tom Nunziato for letting the ESC of Stark County letting us do this as well every week. So thank you very much. And thank you all for attending. And you are the ones on the forefront. So thank you very much for coming and telling us what is going on out there so that we know how to best support you. So thank you very much and keep up the good work. I'm sure you are all doing much better than you are thinking.